Picture this, a cold, misty dawn on the Salisbury Plain in England. The first rays of sunlight begin to creep over the horizon, gently illuminating a circle of massive, silent stones that have stood here for thousands of years. There is a profound quiet, a deep stillness that seems to emanate from the very earth beneath them. This is Stonehenge, one of the world's most iconic and enduring ancient mysteries. For centuries, people from all walks of life have stood where you are now picturing themselves, looking upon these colossal rocks and asking one simple, yet deeply compelling question: why? What was the true purpose of this incredible structure, built with such immense effort by a people who left no written records behind? The mystery of Stonehenge is a puzzle that has captivated historians, archaeologists, and dreamers alike, a secret locked in stone and time, waiting to be understood. Today, we invite you on a different kind of exploration. This isn't just a historical investigation or a dry lecture of facts and figures. Instead, we are going on a deep, relaxing journey into the very heart of this ancient enigma. We'll gently uncover the layers of its past, from the fascinating theories about its astronomical alignments to the incredible human endeavor required to build it. But we'll do so in a way that is designed to be as soothing for your senses as it is stimulating for your mind. Think of this as a form of mental archaeology, where we carefully brush away the dust of the ages, not with haste, but with a calm and curious spirit, allowing the story to reveal itself at a peaceful, contemplative pace. So find a comfortable place, take a slow, deep breath, and allow yourself to be transported. Let the ambient sounds and visuals wash over you as we begin to unwind the threads of this ancient secret together. This is more than just learning about stones. It is about connecting with a profound piece of human history, feeling the awe and wonder that these monuments inspire, and perhaps by the end of our journey, catching a glimpse of the minds and hearts that raised them towards the heavens so long ago. Let's begin our relaxing exploration of Stonehenge's greatest secrets. To truly understand Stonehenge, we must first step back in time, long before the first stone was ever set in place, and feel the land upon which it was built. The Salisbury Plain is not a dramatic, mountainous landscape, but rather a wide, open expanse of rolling chalk downland. These are gentle hills covered in grass that seems to whisper in the wind, creating a sense of immense space and sky. There is a profound quietude here, a feeling of ancientness that seems to seep up from the very soil. The ground itself is chalk, a soft white rock formed from the skeletons of countless ancient sea creatures, giving the land a particular character. It's porous, well-drained, and in certain lights, seems almost to glow from within. This was the blank canvas, a place of subtle power and stark beauty, chosen for one of humanity's most ambitious projects. But why here? What was it about this specific patch of earth that called out to people across millennia? The mystery begins not with the stones, but with the land's own silent invitation. Thousands of years before the Great Stone Circle took shape, this land was already inhabited. We're in the Mesolithic era, a time when small, mobile bands of hunter-gatherers roamed across what would later become Britain. These people lived in harmony with the seasons, hunting deer and wild boar, gathering nuts and berries, and following the migratory paths of animals. They left no grand structures for us to find, but they did leave tantalizing clues. Archaeologists have discovered a series of large, deep postholes not far from the eventual site of Stonehenge. These holes once held massive pine posts, erected in an alignment that curiously mirrors the later orientation of the stone monument. What were these towering timbers for? Were they markers for a seasonal gathering place, a sacred site for rituals, or perhaps the first tentative attempt to map the movements of the sun and stars? We may never know for certain, but these posts tell us one vital thing. This location was significant long before Stonehenge was even a concept. The seed of the idea was planted in the minds of people living in a completely different age. This leads us to the compelling question of selection. Why did the Neolithic builders, millennia later, choose to construct their masterpiece on this exact spot, continuing a tradition started by their distant ancestors? Some theories suggest the land itself possessed a unique spiritual energy, a quality felt by generation after generation. Perhaps it was a known meeting point, a neutral ground for different tribes, making it a politically and socially strategic location for a project that would require the cooperation of hundreds, if not thousands, of people. Others point to the geological uniqueness of the area. The chalk bedrock provided a solid, stable foundation, but more intriguingly, the immediate landscape is crisscrossed by natural ridges and grooves that align with the solstice sunrises and sunsets. It's as if the builders looked at the lay of the land and saw a blueprint already written by nature itself, a celestial clockwork they simply needed to accentuate with their own colossal stones. The choice was not random. It was a decision steeped in a deep, accumulated knowledge of the land, its history, and its hidden relationship with the cosmos, creating a foundation of mystery that is as much about the spirit of the place as it is about the physical stones we see today. Moving forward in time from those enigmatic timber posts, we arrive at the moment when the landscape of Salisbury Plain was permanently transformed, marking the very first major phase of construction at the site we now call Stonehenge. This initial monument bore little resemblance to the iconic stone circle we recognize today. Instead, the builders created something equally grand in scale but constructed from the earth itself. They dug a massive circular ditch, heaping the excavated white chalk to form a towering bank inside it, creating what is known as a henge. This was no small undertaking. The ditch alone was wide and deep, and the inner bank would have been a brilliant white rampart visible for miles across the open plain, a stunning declaration of human intention in a vast natural landscape. And just inside this newly created chalk bank, they performed one of the site's most enduring and puzzling acts. They dug a neat, precise circle of 56 pits, each one filled with chunks of white chalk. These are the Aubrey Holes, named for the 17th century antiquarian John Aubrey, who was the first to identify them centuries later. The existence of these 56 pits opens a fascinating window into the sophisticated minds of these Neolithic people. Why exactly 56? What was the significance of this specific number? One of the most compelling theories connects these holes directly to the cosmos. Archaeoastronomers have noted that the number 56 is remarkably close to 3 times the 18.6-year cycle of the Moon, known as the lunar nodal cycle. This is the period it takes for the Moon's rising and setting points to complete a full swing across the horizon, from its most northerly to its most southerly extreme and back again. It is possible that by using markers placed in these holes, perhaps wooden posts, the builders could have tracked this long, complex lunar cycle, predicting eclipses and marking significant lunar events with an accuracy that seems astonishing for a society we often think of as primitive. This would transform the earliest Stonehenge into a sophisticated astronomical observatory, a colossal lunar calendar etched into the very earth. Yet, the purpose of the Aubrey Holes appears to be multifaceted, revealing a site that served both the living and the dead. Excavations within these chalk-filled pits have uncovered a profound and somber treasure: cremated human remains. Dozens of individuals, men, women, and even children, were laid to rest here, making this early Stonehenge one of the largest late Neolithic cemeteries in Britain. This wasn't just a place for observing the heavens, it was a sacred resting place, a domain of the ancestors. The act of placing cremated remains in these specific pits, arranged in a perfect circle just inside the sacred bank and ditch, suggests a powerful link between the cycles of the cosmos above and the cycle of human life and death below. The community was literally burying their loved ones within a cosmic clock, intertwining their memory with the eternal rhythms of the moon and stars. So, were the Aubrey Holes an astronomical calculator, a cemetery, or something else entirely? The most likely answer is that they were all these things at once. For the people who built this monument, the boundaries between science, spirituality, and community were not separate. Tracking the moon was not a purely scientific exercise. It was a way of understanding the divine, of marking sacred time for ceremonies and gatherings. Burying their dead within this system was a way to honor their ancestors, placing them at the heart of this sacred, cosmic order. This first Stonehenge was not a single-purpose structure, but a vibrant, multi-layered sanctuary. It was a place where the community came together to celebrate, to mourn, to observe the skies, and to reaffirm their place in a vast, interconnected universe, establishing a legacy of mystery and grandeur that would compel future generations to build upon this sacred ground for centuries to come. Centuries after the great earthwork and the Aubrey Holes defined the sacred space, the landscape of Stonehenge underwent a radical and puzzling transformation. The familiar white chalk circle was now joined by a new type of stone, one that was utterly alien to the Salisbury Plain. These were the Bluestones, smaller than the gigantic Sarsens that would come later, but possessing a unique, almost magical quality. When wet or freshly broken, they reveal a striking interior of mottled blue, gray, and green, speckled with white crystals that catch the light. Their very presence here is the source of one of Stonehenge's most profound logistical mysteries, because these stones did not belong to this land. Their geological fingerprint points unequivocally to the Preseli Hills in far western Wales, a staggering distance of over 140 miles away. Imagine the sheer scale of that endeavor for a prehistoric community. We are not talking about carrying small, precious talismans. We are talking about transporting around 80 massive stones, each weighing up to 4 tons, across a terrain of mountains, rivers, and dense forests. The question of how they accomplished this has fueled debate for generations. Was this a story of epic human determination, or did nature lend a helping hand? One long-held theory suggests that ancient glaciers during the last ice age could have carried these bluestones as glacial erratics, depositing them much closer to Salisbury Plain. This would have significantly reduced the distance the Neolithic people needed to move them. However, recent geological studies have cast serious doubt on this idea. The specific pathways of the ice sheets do not appear to align with the journey from Preseli to Stonehenge, and no other bluestone erratics from that source have been found anywhere in the intervening landscape. The evidence increasingly points to a single, astonishing conclusion. This was almost entirely a human endeavor, a breathtaking feat of organization, ingenuity, and raw communal effort. So how might they have done it? While we may never know the exact method, we can piece together a plausible sequence based on known Neolithic capabilities. The journey likely began in the rugged Preseli Hills, where the stones were carefully quarried from specific outcrops. From there, the most logical route would have been a combination of land and water. The builders could have used a system of wooden rollers, ropes made from plant fibers, and sheer human muscle power to haul these multi-ton stones down to the waterways of the Welsh coast. Once there, they might have been loaded onto rafts or secured between dugout canoes for a perilous sea voyage, skirting the southern coast of Wales and then moving eastward along the river systems that crisscross what is now England. The final leg would have required dragging them overland once more, up and down the gentle slopes of the Wiltshire countryside. This was not a single expedition but a generational project, a story passed down from parents to children, a shared mission that must have defined the identity of the entire community. This monumental effort forces us to ask an even deeper question than how. We must ask why. Why go to such extraordinary lengths? If the purpose was simply to have a circle of standing stones, there was perfectly good local sandstone, the Sarsens, available just 20 miles north. The answer almost certainly lies in the spiritual and symbolic power of the Bluestones themselves. The Preseli Hills were not just a random source of rock, they were a revered and mystical landscape in their own right. The specific quarries like Carn Godog and Craig Rose Y Felon were located in places of dramatic natural beauty, places that archaeological evidence suggests were already considered sacred for centuries. The stones were believed to possess healing properties, a notion supported by the later folk legends that grew up around Stonehenge. It seems the Neolithic builders weren't just moving stones, they were transporting a piece of a sacred mountain. They were bringing the essence, the mana, the very spirit of that distant holy place to their own great sanctuary on the Salisbury Plain. This was an act of spiritual consolidation, a way of unifying the power of two sacred geographies into one ultimate center of the world. The Bluestones were not merely building materials, they were revered relics, and their incredible journey was a pilgrimage of stone, an expression of faith and identity on a scale that still inspires awe today. The introduction of the Bluestones was a monumental achievement in its own right, yet the vision for Stonehenge was far from complete. The landscape was about to witness its most dramatic transformation, the phase that would define its silhouette for millennia to come. This was the age of the Sarsens. These are the stones that most people picture when they hear the name Stonehenge. Colossal blocks of a hard, dense sandstone that naturally occurs in sprawling outcrops on the Marlborough Downs about 20 miles to the north. While this distance seems modest compared to the epic journey of the Bluestones, the scale of the Sarsens presented an entirely new order of challenge. We are no longer dealing with 4-ton stones, but with genuine giants. The largest of these Sarsens stand over 20 feet tall and weigh upwards of 30 tons, equivalent to a stack of 6 full-grown elephants. Transporting just one of these behemoths was a Herculean task, and the builders intended to move and erect around 80 of them. The process of moving these stones from their quarries to the Salisbury Plain is a testament to Neolithic ingenuity and community. Without the wheel or metal tools, the builders relied on a profound understanding of leverage, friction, and simple machines. The most likely method involved a combination of sledges, rollers made from felled trees, and an immense quantity of rope crafted from plant fibers like lime bark. Teams of workers would have carefully levered a stone onto a wooden sledge, and then, using ropes made from hundreds of people pulling in unison, they would have dragged this colossal load across the landscape. They may have even prepared a trackway, a so-called causeway, by laying down wooden planks to ease the passage and prevent the sledge from bogging down in soft ground. Every inch of this journey was a symphony of coordinated effort, a communal project that must have bound the society together with a shared sense of purpose. The sound alone would have been immense: the groaning of wood, the rhythmic chanting of the pullers, the steady, earth-shaking drag of stone across the chalkland. Once these titanic stones arrived at the site, the work shifted from transportation to high-precision engineering. This is where the true architectural genius of Stonehenge reveals itself. The builders did not simply stand these stones upright in a circle. They created sophisticated, interlocking structures. The outer circle, composed of 30 towering Sarsens, was capped by a continuous ring of lintel stones, each carefully shaped to curve slightly, creating a perfect, level circle high above the ground. To achieve this, the stoneworkers employed techniques that would not be out of place in a modern woodworker's shop. The tops of the upright stones were carved with tenons, small, rounded protrusions. Corresponding mortise holes were then laboriously pecked and ground into the underside of the lintels. This tongue and groove system locked the entire ring together, providing incredible stability against the relentless English winds. Furthermore, the lintels themselves were joined to one another using another complex joint, a kind of toggle and loop connection, ensuring the entire circle acted as a single, unified structure. This was not just stacking rocks, this was building with the precision of master craftsmen. The most awe-inspiring structures at Stonehenge, however, lie at the very heart of the complex: the 5 majestic trilithons arranged in a horseshoe shape. A trilithon, meaning 3 stones, is the ultimate expression of this building style. 2 massive vertical pillars supporting a single, equally massive horizontal lintel. The scale here is almost incomprehensible. The largest of these trilithons, known as the Great Trilithon, once stood over 24 feet high, with its fallen lintel alone weighing an estimated 45 tons. Raising these components was the pinnacle of the builder's ambition. The process likely involved a combination of brute force and brilliant physics. To raise an upright, they would have dug a large, sloping-sided pit, maneuvering the base of the stone into the deeper end. Using ropes and leverage from a framed timber structures, teams would have slowly, painstakingly hauled the stone upright, guiding its base into the pit as counterweights and human strength fought against gravity. Once the upright was stabilized and the pit backfilled with rubble, the even more delicate task of placing the lintel began. This may have involved building an enormous earthen ramp and carefully dragging the lintel up to the very top of the two pillars before sliding it perfectly into place, a millimeter-perfect alignment of mortise and tenon high in the air. This colossal effort, the culmination of centuries of labor, represents more than just a technical triumph. The arrangement of the Sarsen circle and the inner trilithon horseshoe creates a carefully staged and directed space. The open side of the horseshoe faces directly toward the midwinter sunset, framing that celestial event in a monumental stone doorway. Someone standing in the center of the monument would have been surrounded by this towering architecture, a physical representation of a cosmos ordered by human hands. The sheer scale and permanence of the Sarsens communicated power, unity, and a profound connection to the divine. This was the final, definitive form of Stonehenge, a structure built not for a single generation, but for the ages, a permanent stamp of a sophisticated culture's identity and beliefs upon the very fabric of the land. Standing apart from the main stone circle, solitary and slightly tilted, is the heel stone, a massive, unshaped sarsen that seems to act as a silent sentinel to the entire complex. Its position is far from random. If you were to stand in the very center of Stonehenge and look northeast through the entrance of the monument, your gaze would be directed precisely toward this stone. And on the morning of the summer solstice, the longest day of the year, something magical happens. As the sun begins to crest the horizon, it appears to rise directly out of the top of the heel stone, its brilliant rays flooding through the monument's entrance and illuminating the central altar stone in a dramatic burst of light. This alignment is so precise that it cannot be dismissed as mere coincidence. It is a deliberate, breathtaking piece of architectural engineering, a stone calendar designed to herald the most important day in the solar year. For an agricultural society, the summer solstice was not just an astronomical event, it was a vital turning point. It marked the peak of the sun's power, a promise of abundant growth and a crucial signal for planting and harvesting cycles. The people who built Stonehenge were not just building with stone, they were building with time itself, anchoring their world to the reliable, cyclical rhythms of the cosmos. This profound alignment opens a fascinating debate about the primary purpose of Stonehenge. Was it a sophisticated astronomical observatory, a temple for sun worship, or a seamless fusion of both? The astronomical calendar theory is powerfully compelling. The heel stone's alignment, combined with the monument's orientation toward the midwinter sunset in the opposite direction, suggests a deep, practical knowledge of the solar cycle. This was a society that needed to predict the seasons with accuracy to ensure their survival. Stonehenge could have functioned as a colossal celestial clock, its stones acting as fixed sightlines for priests or elders to mark the passing of the year, to announce festivals, and to coordinate the communal labor of the entire region. In this view, the monument was a tool for organizing society around the immutable laws of nature. Yet, to see Stonehenge as merely a scientific instrument feels incomplete. The sheer scale, the immense effort, and the sacred nature of the location, with its deep history as a burial ground, all point toward a powerful spiritual dimension. For a people who saw the sun as a life-giving deity, the summer solstice would have been a moment of supreme religious significance. The dramatic sunrise, framed perfectly by the heel stone and flooding the inner sanctuary, would have been perceived as a direct manifestation of the divine. It was the moment when the sun god was at the peak of its strength, a time for powerful rituals, offerings, and celebrations to ensure its return after the coming decline into winter. The two purposes are not mutually exclusive. For the Neolithic mind, astronomy and religion were two sides of the same coin. Understanding the sun's cycle was a way of understanding the will of the gods. The stone circle was both a temple where they could commune with their deity and a scientific instrument that allowed them to measure its divine progress across the sky. This ancient fascination with the solstice sunrise has endured for millennia, creating a direct, if ethereal, link between the modern world and its prehistoric past. Every year on the 21st of June, thousands of people from all corners of the globe gather at Stonehenge long before dawn. They wait in the cool night air, wrapped in blankets, their voices a low, expectant hum. As the first hint of light begins to bleed into the eastern sky, a hush often falls over the crowd. Then, as the sun's upper rim breaks the horizon, a cheer erupts. People raise their hands, beat drums, chant, and meditate. It is a vibrant, chaotic, and deeply moving spectacle. While our modern celebrations are a mixture of neo-pagan reverence, New Age spirituality, and pure tourist spectacle, they tap into the same fundamental human awe that the original builders must have felt. We are standing in the same spot, witnessing the same celestial event, connected across 5,000 years by a shared sense of wonder. We may not fully understand the specific prayers they uttered or the exact rituals they performed, but the collective gasp as the sun rises over the heel stone is a universal language. It is a testament to the enduring power of this place, a monument that continues to draw us in, not just to solve its mystery, but to experience for ourselves a moment of timeless celestial magic. Deep within the heart of the stone circle, lying flat and partly obscured by the fall of the great Trilithon in ages past, rests a massive slab of stone that holds a mystery all its own, the altar stone. In a monument defined by its towering vertical pillars and elegant lintels, this stone is an anomaly. It lies horizontally, a vast, recumbent presence at the very center of the complex. Unlike the gray Sarsens or the speckled blue-gray Bluestones, the altar stone possesses a distinct greenish hue, a visual clue that it is geologically unique. This isn't just another piece of the puzzle, it is a puzzle within the puzzle. For while we have traced the Sarsens to the Marlborough Downs and the Bluestones to the Preseli Hills, the altar stone's origin remains an open and hotly debated question. It is a different type of sandstone, and current geological analysis suggests its closest match lies not in Wales, but even farther north, potentially in the old red sandstone formations of the Scottish borders or even farther afield. This raises a staggering possibility. While the Bluestones traveled 140 miles, the altar stone may have journeyed from over 400 miles away, a testament to the unimaginable reach and influence of the Stonehenge culture. The sheer effort of bringing this single, central stone from such a phenomenal distance forces us to consider its profound importance. What role did it play that justified such an epic undertaking? Its traditional name, the altar stone, given by 17th century antiquarians, naturally conjures images of sacrifice, and for a long time, popular imagination pictured it stained with the blood of ritual offerings. However, there is no archaeological evidence to support this dramatic notion. No tools associated with sacrifice have been found there, and the idea may say more about the romantic sensibilities of later eras than it does about Neolithic practices. A more plausible theory is that it served as a pristine surface for offerings of a different kind, perhaps baskets of grain, polished ceremonial axes, or other valuable goods presented to the sun or the ancestors. Its central, focal position makes it the ideal stage for the most sacred of rituals. Another compelling idea is that this great slab was not an altar at all, but a throne. Positioned directly in the center with the entire architecture of the Sarsen circle and Trilithon horseshoe rising around it, this spot would have been the ultimate seat of power. Imagine a priest, a chieftain, or a queen seated here, framed by the towering stones as the solstice sunrise exploded through the entrance and illuminated them in a blaze of golden light. In that moment, the individual would have been transformed, appearing to channel the power of the sun itself. This stone, then, could have been the literal and symbolic center of their universe, a platform that elevated a human leader to a near-divine status, unifying the community under a single celestial authority. Its solitary, central presence is what truly deepens the site's enigma. While the other stones frame the sky and mark the passage of time, the altar stone grounds the monument in a very human drama. It is the focal point where the cosmic and the earthly met, where the abstract movements of the sun and moon were made tangible through ceremony, power, and belief. We may never know the exact rituals performed upon it, but its unique geology and privileged position confirm that it was the spiritual heart of Stonehenge, the silent, unmoving center around which all the mystery and grandeur of the monument eternally revolves. While the grand architecture of Stonehenge speaks of a unified communal vision, some of its most intimate secrets are whispered not by the stone's placement, but by the marks left upon their very skin. If you look closely at the surfaces of several of the massive Sarsens, you can find a series of faint, almost ghostly carvings, etched into the stone thousands of years ago. These are not random scratches, but deliberate, symbolic representations of weaponry specifically, a number of bronze daggers and a few distinctive axe heads. Dating from the Bronze Age, these carvings were created centuries after the great stones were first erected, indicating that the site's significance and use evolved dramatically over time. The presence of these weapons is deeply telling. They suggest that by this later period, Stonehenge may have become a place associated with a warrior elite, a site where power, status, and martial prowess were displayed and perhaps even ritually consecrated. The daggers themselves are not crude drawings. They accurately depict the shape of early bronze weapons with their broad, flat blades and riveted handles. To carve them into the hardest sandstone required immense patience and skill, a deliberate act of leaving a permanent, personal mark on a monument that was already ancient history to the people doing the carving. These are not the marks of the original builders, but of their descendants who are reinterpreting the stone circle's purpose, claiming it for a new era and a new social order centered on the symbolic power of the blade and the axe. This ancient graffiti creates a powerful bridge across time, connecting us to the specific tools and beliefs of people who lived over 3,000 years ago. Yet, the human impulse to leave a mark at Stonehenge did not end with the Bronze Age. The stones have continued to exert a magnetic pull, compelling visitors from much more recent centuries to carve their own names into history, creating a fascinating and sometimes frustrating layer of modern interaction. The most famous example of this is found on one of the inner faces of a Sarsen stone, where the name Wren is clearly carved. This is not a reference to the small bird, but is attributed to none other than Christopher Wren Jr., the son of the famed architect who designed St. Paul's Cathedral in London. According to local law, the younger Wren visited the site in the late 17th century while staying at a nearby estate, and could not resist the temptation to immortalize his family name on the ancient monument. The stark contrast between the Bronze Age daggers and the 17th century name encapsulates the entire history of human engagement with Stonehenge. The ancient carvings were likely acts of profound spiritual or political significance, deeply entwined with the beliefs and social structures of their time. They were a way for a person or a group to connect with the sacred power of the place, to assert their identity within a continuum that stretched back to the ancestors. The carving of Wren, however, represents a different kind of captivation. By the 17th century, the original purpose of Stonehenge had been utterly lost to time. It was a magnificent ruin, a puzzle that fascinated antiquarians and early archaeologists. For someone like Wren, the act of carving his name was less about spiritual connection and more about personal legacy, a desire to physically tether his own story, however briefly, to this enduring enigma. It was an act of admiration, of course, but also one of possession, a way for a modern individual to say, "I was here, and I, too, am part of your long, mysterious story." This layering of human marks, from the symbolic weapons of a Bronze Age chief to the elegant script of a gentleman's son, underscores a fundamental truth about Stonehenge. Its mystery is not a static thing locked away in the Neolithic period. Instead, it is a living, evolving narrative that has been continuously rewritten by every generation that has encountered it. Each era has projected its own questions, its own beliefs, and its own desires onto these stones. The Bronze Age people saw a place to assert their warrior identity. The Romans left coins and pottery, perhaps considering it a temple of a forgotten but powerful local god. Medieval chroniclers spun tales of giants and of Merlin magically transporting the stones from Ireland. The 17th century antiquarians began the first scientific attempts at measurement and documentation, and we today, with our advanced geology and astronomy, seek to unravel its secrets with technology. The carvings and the graffiti are a physical testament to this unbroken chain of human fascination. They show us that the stones have never been silent. They have always been a canvas, not just for the original builders, but for all of humanity, each visitor adding another small, enduring mark to its immense and layered legacy. But for all the grand narratives of cosmic alignments and communal effort, the story of Stonehenge is also written in bone, a stark reminder that this was a place of real human drama. In the late 1970s, archaeologists made a chilling discovery while excavating the ditch that encircles the monument. They uncovered the skeleton of a man, carefully buried but bearing the unmistakable marks of a violent end. He was found with a cache of fine flint arrowheads, earning him the evocative nickname, the Stonehenge Archer. Radiocarbon dating placed his death at around 2300 BC, a time when the great Sarsen stones were newly erected, their surfaces still fresh and unweathered. This was not a death from old age or disease. Forensic analysis revealed that at least 2, and possibly 3, flint arrowheads were embedded in his bones, one having pierced his ribs and sternum. The trajectory of the wounds suggests he was shot from the front and below, a clear indication that he met his end in a fatal confrontation. The presence of this violently killed man, interred within the very fabric of the sacred monument, immediately sparked a pressing question: who was he and why did he die here? One theory paints a dark and ritualistic picture. He could have been a human sacrifice, an offering to the gods or ancestors to ensure the fertility of the land or to sanctify the newly completed stone circle. In many ancient societies, the spilling of human blood was seen as the ultimate offering, a powerful act to appease divine forces. His burial within the ditch, the symbolic boundary between the mundane world and the sacred interior, could signify that his death served a profound communal purpose, his life given to strengthen the spiritual power of the place for everyone. A second, more judicial interpretation suggests he may have been a criminal, executed at this hallowed ground for a grave transgression against the community. Stonehenge, as the region's most important spiritual and political center, would have been the ultimate stage for administering justice. An execution here would carry immense symbolic weight, a public demonstration that the social order was protected by both earthly authority and divine sanction. His careful burial, as opposed to being left exposed, might indicate that he was not an outcast but someone whose death was a necessary, if grim, act to restore cosmic and social balance. Yet another possibility is that the archer was a warrior killed in a skirmish or a raid. The early Bronze Age was not a time of perfect peace. Competition for resources, livestock, and prestige could easily flare into violence. The cache of arrowheads buried with him could be his own, marking him as an archer of some status. Perhaps he was a local hero, mortally wounded while defending the sanctity of Stonehenge from a rival group. Or conversely, he could have been an attacker himself, slain by the monument's defenders and buried unceremoniously in the ditch as a warning. The multiple arrow wounds could point to a sustained attack, more consistent with a fight than a single ritualized killing. What makes the archer's story so uniquely compelling is that it forces us to look past the abstract stones and see the individuals who lived, worshipped, and died here. He was a real person with a name and a story known to his community, who breathed his last on this very ground. His remains anchor the grand, impersonal scale of Stonehenge's construction to a single, tragic event. His death reminds us that this place was not just an abstract calendar or a symbol of power. It was also a backdrop for the full spectrum of human experience, including conflict, justice, and mortality. The silent stones have borne witness to it all, and the Arrow Man's skeleton is a permanent, poignant testament to the fact that the greatest mysteries of Stonehenge are ultimately human ones. But the story of Stonehenge is not confined to the stone circle itself. To truly understand its purpose, we must widen our gaze to the surrounding landscape and to a remarkable ancient pathway known as the Avenue. This is a long, linear earthwork consisting of two parallel banks with ditches running alongside them, creating a corridor roughly 12 meters wide that stretches for nearly 3 kilometers. It does not lead randomly into the countryside. Its course is deliberate and deeply symbolic. One end connects directly to the entrance of the Stonehenge enclosure, while the other winds its way down to the banks of the River Avon. This was not a simple road for everyday travel. Its very design, a defined and bounded corridor, suggests it was a processional way, a sacred path meant for ceremonial use. Imagine the scene. On the most significant days of the year, large groups of people would have gathered by the river, a life-giving source and a potent spiritual boundary. From there, they would have formed a grand procession, moving in unison up this prescribed avenue, their view of the stone circle hidden by the gentle, rolling terrain until the very last moment, building a powerful sense of anticipation with every step. This carefully choreographed approach transformed the entire landscape into a vast, open-air temple. The journey itself became part of the ritual. The River Avon was likely seen as a transitional space, a boundary between the world of the everyday and the world of the sacred. By embarking from its banks, participants were symbolically leaving their ordinary lives behind and entering a consecrated realm. As they walked the avenue, the banks on either side would have framed their view, directing their attention forward and focusing their minds on the spiritual event to come. The final approach was designed for maximum dramatic impact. The avenue curves slightly as it nears Stonehenge, and because of the natural lie of the land, the great stone circle would have remained hidden until the procession was almost upon it. Then, as the people crested the final rise, the entire monument would have suddenly and breathtakingly revealed itself, its colossal stones stark against the sky. This was not an accidental feature. It was a masterstroke of ritual theater, an architectural surprise meant to inspire awe and reinforce the immense power of the place. This processional route also offers a compelling answer to one of the site's great logistical questions. How were the Bluestones finally brought to the circle after their epic journey from Wales? While the long-distance transit likely involved a combination of river transport and overland hauling, the final leg of the journey from the River Avon to the stone circle itself almost certainly took place along the avenue. This transforms that last, grueling effort from a mere engineering problem into a profound spiritual act. Instead of being a simple task of moving heavy objects, it became a sacred procession. We can envision teams of people not just laboring in silence, but perhaps chanting, singing, or performing rituals as they dragged each multi-ton bluestone up the sacred corridor. Each stone was not just cargo, it was a revered object, a piece of a holy mountain, being ceremonially escorted to its final resting place. The act of moving it was an act of devotion, a physical prayer that imbued the stones with even greater significance before they were ever set upright. The avenue, therefore, was the final consecrating path, the means by which the spiritual power of the distant Preseli Hills was formally and ceremonially integrated into the heart of the Salisbury Plain. This understanding of the avenue fundamentally changes our perception of Stonehenge. It shows us that the monument was not an isolated structure, but rather the central node in a much larger ceremonial complex. The entire landscape was purposefully woven together: the river, the processional way, and the stone circle. To create a holistic ritual experience, the journey along the avenue was as important as the destination itself. It physically and spiritually prepared the participants, building a collective energy and focus that would culminate in the ceremonies held within the circle. This integrated design reveals a society with a sophisticated understanding of the psychological impact of space and movement. They were not just builders of stones, they were choreographers of human experience, designing a sacred geography that guided people on both a physical and a spiritual journey, ensuring that every step toward Stonehenge was a step deeper into the realm of the ancestors and the cosmos. To truly grasp the magnitude of the accomplishment, we must travel in our minds away from the Salisbury Plain, across the rolling hills and river valleys of Britain, to a very different landscape: the Preseli Hills in southwest Wales. This is a place of wild, rugged beauty, where the wind sweeps across heather-clad slopes and ancient rock formations break through the thin soil. It is here, at specific outcrops with names like Carn Godog and Craig Rose Y Felin, that our story finds its source. For centuries, the origin of the Bluestones was itself a mystery, a subject of legend and scientific debate. It was only through painstaking geological detective work, comparing the unique mineral signature of the Stonehenge Bluestones to rock samples from across Britain, that researchers were able to pinpoint these exact Welsh quarries with near certainty. The match was perfect, closing one chapter of the mystery only to open several more, far more intriguing ones. Recent archaeological excavations at these remote quarries have completely overturned any lingering notions of primitive, haphazard stone extraction. What they have revealed is evidence of a highly organized and sophisticated operation. At Craig Rose Y Felin, for instance, excavators found not just simple hammerstones but a whole toolkit of quarrying technology. The Neolithic workers skillfully used the natural geology to their advantage. They identified natural vertical fissures in the rock face and then deliberately dug away at the base of a pillar, creating a critical overhang. To fracture the stone free, they didn't just batter it randomly. They discovered the clever use of fire, heating the rock with small, controlled fires, and then rapidly cooling it with water, a process known as thermal shock that creates cracks and weakens the stone. Then, using stone mauls and wooden wedges, they could precisely prise these massive, ready-made pillars from the outcrop. Furthermore, the discovery of platforms made of stone and earth, along with charcoal from the fires used to cook food, suggests these were not temporary camps but established work sites, occupied seasonally over many years, perhaps even generations. This was not a frantic grab for rocks, it was a patient, deliberate, and technically brilliant enterprise. This brings us to the most profound and captivating question of all. Why go to such extraordinary lengths for these specific stones from this specific place? If the goal was simply to have a circle of standing stones, there was an abundance of perfectly good local Sarsen sandstone available just 20 miles north of Stonehenge. The answer almost certainly lies not in the practicality of the stone, but in its perceived power. The very name Bluestone gives us a clue. When freshly broken or wet, these rocks reveal a stunning interior of mottled blue, green, and gray, flecked with sparkling white feldspar crystals. In a world without polished metal or glass, the visual impact of such a stone would have been magical, otherworldly, but the allure went far deeper than mere appearance. The specific quarries themselves were located in landscapes already steeped in significance for the local Welsh populations. Carn Godog, for example, is not just a random rock outcrop. It is a dramatic, prominent feature in the local topography, a place that would have naturally drawn the eye and the imagination. Archaeological evidence suggests that these sites were already gathering places and ritual centers long before the quarrying for Stonehenge began. It seems the Neolithic builders weren't just extracting rock, they were extracting the very essence of a place already considered sacred. They were transporting a piece of a holy mountain. This idea is powerfully supported by folklore that persisted in the region for millennia, long after the memory of Stonehenge's construction had faded. Local legends attributed healing properties to the springs and rocks of the Preseli Hills. In later centuries, people would chip off pieces of the fallen Bluestones at Stonehenge itself to use as talismans for healing, believing they held curative powers. This enduring tradition strongly suggests that the stones were valued not just as building material, but as objects imbued with intrinsic spiritual or medicinal energy. So, the incredible 140-mile journey begins to look less like a simple logistics operation and more like a spiritual pilgrimage. The movement of the Bluestones was an act of profound symbolic importance. It was a way of physically connecting two powerful sacred landscapes, the mystical Preseli Hills and the cosmic center on the Salisbury Plain. By bringing the Bluestones to Stonehenge, the builders were unifying the spiritual power of their world, consolidating it into one ultimate ceremonial complex. They were not merely constructing a monument, they were performing an act of geo-spiritual unification, weaving the magic of a distant, revered mountain into the heart of their own great henge. The Bluestones, therefore, were far more than architectural components. They were sacred relics, their epic journey a testament to a belief system so powerful, so compelling, that it could move mountains, or at the very least, move pieces of them across an entire country. The idea that Stonehenge was an ancient astronomical observatory is one of the most captivating and influential theories ever proposed, transforming our view of its builders from primitive stone raisers into sophisticated sky watchers. This concept gained tremendous momentum in the 1960s with the work of astronomer Gerald Hawkins, who used an early IBM computer to analyze the monument's geometry. Hawkins identified 165 key points in the stone circle and its surrounding landscape, and he famously concluded that there were far too many alignments with major solar and lunar events for them to be mere coincidence. In his groundbreaking book, Stonehenge Decoded, he made the bold claim that the monument was a Neolithic computer, a complex device used to predict eclipses by tracking the intricate cycles of the moon. This was a revolutionary idea, suggesting a level of intellectual achievement that few had previously attributed to prehistoric societies. The public imagination was electrified by the thought of ancient priests using these silent stones to foresee dramatic celestial phenomena, wielding knowledge that must have seemed like pure magic to the wider community. Of course, the solstice alignments are the most famous and undeniable astronomical features. As we've discussed, the heel stone perfectly frames the summer solstice sunrise for an observer standing at the center, and the entire monument is symmetrically oriented toward the winter solstice sunset in the opposite direction. But the astronomical potential of Stonehenge likely goes much deeper, extending to the more complex and subtle movements of the moon. Every 18.6 years, the moon completes what is known as a lunar standstill. This is not a moment when the moon stands still, but rather the point in its long cycle where it reaches its most extreme northerly and southerly rising and setting positions on the horizon. These positions are far less obvious than the sun's solstice points, shifting only very slightly from year to year. Yet, some researchers argue that the architecture of Stonehenge was designed to mark these very limits. The four station stones, which form a rectangle around the main circle, are a key piece of this puzzle. The long sides of this rectangle appear to align with the most southerly rising point of the moon during a major standstill, while the short sides point to the most northerly rising point. If this was intentional, it means the builders were not just tracking the annual solar year, but were also mapping a celestial cycle that spans a generation, a feat requiring careful, long-term observation and record-keeping passed down through the decades. Naturally, such a sweeping theory has sparked considerable debate within academic circles. Many archaeologists, while accepting the primary solstice alignments, urge caution against what they call astronomical overinterpretation. They point out that with so many stones, postholes, and earthworks at Stonehenge, it is statistically probable that some lines will point to some celestial event purely by chance. The critique is that if you look hard enough for alignments, you will inevitably find them, whether they were intended by the builders or not. This school of thought argues that we risk projecting our own modern, scientific world onto a people whose motivations were likely rooted in religion and cosmology, not in what we would recognize as objective science. For them, the primary function of Stonehenge was as a temple, a place of ritual and social gathering. The astronomical alignments were a means to that end, a way to determine the most potent times for ceremonies that united the community with the divine, not an end in themselves for making precise predictions. So, how do we reconcile these differing perspectives? The most compelling resolution is to understand that for a Neolithic society, this distinction between observatory and temple would have been meaningless. Their entire worldview was likely an inseparable blend of the practical and the spiritual. Knowing the precise date of the solstice was pragmatically vital for an agricultural society, signaling when to plant and when to harvest. But it was also spiritually profound, representing the annual rebirth of the sun god or the pivotal moment when the veil between the worlds was thinnest. The ability to predict a lunar eclipse would have been a source of immense social power, allowing a priestly class to demonstrate their special connection to the cosmos, to command the moon to return, thereby preventing panic and reinforcing social order. In this light, Stonehenge becomes both a cathedral and a calendar, a ritual theater and a cosmic calculator. It was a machine, not in the cold, metallic sense we think of today, but a machine built of earth and stone, powered by human belief and operated by those who could read the language of the heavens, seamlessly uniting the practical needs of survival with the profound human yearning to understand our place in the universe. Among the many roles Stonehenge may have played, one of the most human and poignant is the idea that it functioned as a great center of healing, a prehistoric sanctuary where the sick and injured journeyed in search of a miracle. This theory transforms our image of the monument from a cold, astronomical calculator into a place of desperate hope and profound compassion. The evidence for this begins not with the stones themselves, but with the people who were laid to rest there. Archaeological analysis of the human remains discovered around Stonehenge reveals a startling pattern. A significant number of these individuals show clear signs of severe physical trauma or chronic disease. We find skeletons with broken limbs that have healed imperfectly, bones withered by infection, and the telltale marks of debilitating conditions. What makes this even more remarkable is that isotopic analysis of their teeth enamel, which acts as a chemical record of a person's childhood environment, indicates that many of them were not from the local area. They came from all across Britain, some from as far away as Wales and even the Scottish Highlands. This suggests a powerful, magnetic pull. People were undertaking incredibly long and arduous journeys, often while gravely ill or injured, to reach this specific place. They weren't just coming for a seasonal festival, they were pilgrims traveling to what they believed was a place of unique, supernatural power where their suffering could be alleviated. This desperate pilgrimage points directly to the most distinctive feature of the monument, the Bluestones. According to the healing sanctuary theory, these were not merely architectural elements, they were the very source of the site's curative reputation. The Bluestones, with their striking, speckled blue and green hues when wet, were believed to possess inherent magical or medicinal properties. This isn't just modern speculation. It is supported by folklore that persisted in the region for thousands of years. Even into the Middle Ages, people spoke of the stone's ability to draw out illness and heal wounds. The very act of touching the stone, or perhaps drinking water that had been poured over it, was thought to transfer its life-giving energy to the afflicted person. In this light, the incredible effort to transport 80 of these stones from the sacred Preseli Hills in Wales makes a different kind of sense. It wasn't just about moving building materials, it was about relocating the source of the healing power itself. The builders were essentially bringing a holy mountain's curative essence to a central, accessible location, creating a kind of Neolithic Lourdes where the magic was concentrated and available to all who could make the journey. Imagine the scene within the circle during its operational life. It would not have been a silent, empty space reserved only for priests on solstice mornings. Instead, it might have been a bustling, emotionally charged arena of human suffering and hope. Families would have carefully laid their loved ones against the cool surface of a bluestone monolith, praying for a cure. Healers or shamanic figures might have moved among the crowd, performing rituals, perhaps using stone tools to chip off small flakes of the bluestone to be ground into a powder and consumed as a medicinal potion. The discovery of numerous bluestone chips in the surrounding soil, far more than would result from simple construction debris, supports this idea of active, ritualistic use. The air would have been thick with the scent of healing herbs, the murmur of prayers, and the palpable tension of people waiting for a sign, for a miracle. This transforms Stonehenge from an abstract monument into a deeply human space, a hospital of last resort where the boundaries between spiritual faith and physical medicine were completely blurred. Of course, this compelling theory does not stand alone, and it must be weighed against the other potential functions of the site. Could Stonehenge have been a healing sanctuary, an astronomical observatory, and a royal cemetery all at once? For a Neolithic worldview, the answer is likely yes. These purposes were not mutually exclusive but were probably deeply intertwined. The ability to predict the solstices and lunar cycles would have been crucial for determining the most auspicious times for healing rituals, the moments when the veil between worlds was thinnest and the stone's power was at its peak. The presence of elite burials, perhaps of chieftains or high priests, would have reinforced the site's connection to the ancestral spirits, who are often seen as intermediaries who could appeal to the gods on behalf of the living. A sick person traveling to Stonehenge would have been arriving at a place that combined the perceived authority of cosmic science, the spiritual power of the ancestors, and the tangible magic of the Bluestones. It was a holistic center for both the body and the soul, where every aspect of its design and function worked in concert to provide a total, transformative experience. This multifaceted role ultimately deepens the mystery, presenting Stonehenge not as a monument with a single, simple purpose, but as the dynamic, beating heart of an ancient belief system, a place where the desperate and the faithful converged under the watchful eyes of the sun and the moon, all seeking their own form of salvation. Perhaps the most powerful way to understand Stonehenge is to stop searching for a single, definitive purpose, and instead to see it as a grand, unified ritual center, a stage upon which the entire drama of human life unfolded across the centuries. This magnificent structure was not an astronomical observatory one day and a healing sanctuary the next. It was all of these things simultaneously, a physical and spiritual hub where science, religion, medicine, and politics converged into a single, cohesive worldview. For the people who built and used it, the movement of the sun was not separate from the power to heal, and the veneration of ancestors was intrinsically linked to the authority of their leaders. Stonehenge was the ultimate expression of this interconnected universe, a place where every aspect of existence could be addressed, celebrated, and understood. Consider how these functions could have worked in harmony rather than in conflict. The solar and lunar alignments provided the sacred timetable, marking the most potent moments for action. The summer solstice sunrise, for instance, was not just a celestial event, it was the trigger for the year's most important gathering. At this precise time, when the sun's power was at its zenith, the community would assemble. Pilgrims seeking healing would be brought to the Bluestones, believing the solstice energy amplified the stone's curative properties. At the same moment, political or religious leaders might stand at the center, their authority sanctified by the dramatic light show, while rituals honoring the ancestors buried within the Aubrey Holes reinforced the community's lineage and identity. In this integrated model, the astronomy set the calendar, the healing addressed the body, the ancestor worship tended to the soul, and the political ceremonies maintained social order. Each function supported the others, creating a self-reinforcing system of belief and power that made Stonehenge the indispensable heart of the region. This grand, multi-purpose role was not static, however. It evolved dramatically over the monument's astonishing 1,500-year construction period, reflecting the changing needs and beliefs of the societies that stewarded it. The story begins in the early Neolithic period, around 3000 BC, with the simple circular ditch and the Aubrey Holes. In this first chapter, the site's primary identity was that of a sacred cemetery and a lunar observatory, a place deeply connected to death, ancestors, and the longer, more mysterious cycles of the moon. The community was likely smaller, more localized, and its rituals were intimate, focused on placing their dead within a cosmic framework. Then, centuries later, the arrival of the Bluestones from Wales marked a seismic shift. This was no longer a local project. It was a statement of far-reaching connections and a new, powerful belief in the magical properties of these foreign stones. The site's purpose expanded to include long-distance pilgrimage and healing, transforming it into a regional center of hope and miracles. The final, most dramatic evolution came with the erection of the colossal Sarsens during the late Neolithic. This phase speaks of a society that had become more centralized, more hierarchical, and more focused on solar power. The sheer scale of the Sarsen circle and the towering Trilithons projected an image of undeniable permanent authority. The architecture itself now emphasized the solstices, shifting the cosmic focus from the complex lunar cycles to the more predictable and politically potent solar year. This was the era of the warrior elite, as evidenced by the dagger carvings on the stones and the grand processional avenue, which formalized the approach to the monument as a theatrical experience. The original lunar cemetery had been enveloped by a solar-powered temple, a healing center, and a stage for displaying secular power. Stonehenge did not replace its old functions, it accumulated them layer upon layer, each generation adding new meaning while still honoring the old, creating a palimpsest of belief that makes the monument so uniquely complex and compelling to this day. Ultimately, the enduring mystery of Stonehenge is not a puzzle to be solved with a single key, but a symphony to be appreciated in its full, rich complexity. It stands as a profound testament to the human mind's ability to weave together the practical and the spiritual, the earthly and the cosmic. It was a place where a farmer could petition for a good harvest, a grieving family could honor their ancestors, a sick child could be brought for a miracle, and a chieftain could demonstrate their divine right to rule. This multifaceted nature is precisely why Stonehenge continues to captivate us. It refuses to be pinned down to one simple explanation because it was built to serve the entirety of human life, its fears, its hopes, its questions, and its need for connection to something greater than itself. The stones do not whisper one secret but many, and their true message is that our ancient ancestors lived in a world as rich, layered, and meaningful as our own. While we often focus on what our eyes can see at Stonehenge, The towering stones, the celestial alignments, the human remains. There is another, more ethereal dimension to this ancient site that speaks directly to our ears. Recent investigations have opened up a captivating and less explored frontier in understanding the monument, the world of sound. Archaeoacoustics, the study of sound in archaeological contexts, has begun to reveal that Stonehenge was not just a visual spectacle. It was an auditory experience, carefully engineered to manipulate sound in ways that would have profoundly amplified its spiritual power. If you stand in the center of the stone circle today, with many of the lintels missing and stones fallen, you can still get a faint sense of this, but to understand its original impact, we need to mentally rebuild the monument as it once was. Imagine a complete circle of 30 Sarsen uprights, all capped by a continuous ring of lintel stones, creating a massive, enclosed stone drum. This was not an open arrangement of monoliths, it was a contained, reverberant space, and its acoustic properties were likely as intentional as its solar alignments. Researchers from the University of Salford conducted a groundbreaking experiment to scientifically measure these properties. They built a precise 1:12 scale model of the complete Stonehenge, using all 157 original stones, and tested its acoustic behavior in a specialized echoic chamber. What they discovered was remarkable. The full, lintel-topped stone circle acted as a giant sound reflector. Sounds produced within the circle would not travel far outward. Instead, they were contained and focused inward, bouncing off the hard, smooth stone surfaces. This created a significant reverberation effect, meaning that a drum beat, a chant, or the blast of a horn would not end abruptly but would hang in the air, decaying slowly and creating a sustained, immersive soundscape. The reverberation time within the intact circle was calculated to be just over half a second for mid-frequency sounds. This might not sound like much to our modern ears, accustomed to the dampened acoustics of carpeted rooms, but in a Neolithic context, this would have been an incredibly dramatic and otherworldly effect. It would have transformed individual, percussive sounds into a continuous, layered blanket of noise, enveloping everyone inside in a shared auditory experience. Now, let's populate this acoustic space with the sounds that would have filled it during a grand ceremony. Picture a group of several dozen people gathered within the circle as the solstice sun rises. A steady, rhythmic drumming begins, perhaps on skin-covered drums or simply by beating wooden staves on the ground. Within the stone enclosure, each drumbeat would not just be heard, it would be felt. The low-frequency thumps would resonate through the earth and the very bodies of the participants, creating a physical vibration that synchronized heartbeats and breathing. Then a chorus of voices rises in a chant, a simple, repetitive melody or a series of powerful incantations. The stone walls would catch these voices, blending them together and reflecting them back so that the chant no longer seemed to come from a few individuals but from the circle itself. It would sound as if the ancestors, whose remains were buried just feet away in the Aubrey Holes, were joining in from the spirit world. The sound would become a palpable, living entity, swirling around the participants and eroding the boundary between the individual self and the collective whole. This sophisticated acoustic environment was almost certainly not an accident. The builders went to immense trouble to shape the tops of the upright sarsens to hold the lintels securely, creating that continuous reflective surface. They could have built a simple circle of standing stones without the capstones, but they chose a more complex and labor-intensive method. This suggests that the fully enclosed circle was essential to the intended experience. The acoustics would have served multiple, intertwined purposes. For the community, it fostered a powerful sense of unity and shared identity. When your voice is absorbed into a collective reverberation, it becomes difficult to distinguish your own sound from that of your neighbor. You literally become one voice, one heartbeat. This would have been a potent tool for social cohesion, binding the community together in a visceral, emotional way. For the ritual leaders or shamanic figures, the acoustics were a tool of authority and transcendence. A priest standing by the altar stone, speaking or chanting, would have had their voice amplified and sustained, making it seem more powerful, more divine. It would appear as if the stones themselves were speaking through them, lending an undeniable authority to their proclamations. The sonic properties of the space transformed human ritual into an immersive, multi-sensory spectacle, where the boundaries between the physical and spiritual worlds were not just seen, but heard, felt, and believed. But to fully grasp the ritual life of Stonehenge, we must widen our gaze just 2 miles to the northeast, to the banks of the River Avon, where another, very different kind of monument once thrived. This is Durrington Walls, a massive henge enclosure so vast that its scale almost defies belief. While Stonehenge is a compact, precise arrangement of stone, Durrington Walls was a sprawling community built of timber and earth. Its great ditch and bank enclose an area equivalent to nearly 20 football fields, making it one of the largest henge monuments in all of Britain. For a long time, its significance was overshadowed by its more famous neighbor, but recent archaeological discoveries have completely transformed our understanding, revealing that Stonehenge and Durrington Walls were 2 halves of a single, grand ceremonial complex, each playing a distinct but interconnected role in a powerful spiritual cycle. The evidence uncovered at Durrington Walls paints a vivid picture of a bustling, vibrant settlement, a place teeming with life at precisely the time the great Sarsen stones were being raised at Stonehenge. Excavations have revealed the remains of numerous houses, simple circular dwellings with clay floors and central hearths, but these were not permanent homes for a large population. The pattern of finds suggests something more temporary and focused. The sheer volume of animal bones found at the site is staggering, amounting to tens of thousands of fragments, primarily from domesticated pigs and cattle. What's truly fascinating is the analysis of these bones. By studying the chemistry of the animal's teeth, scientists can determine where they were raised. This isotopic analysis reveals a story of a massive, organized provisioning network. These animals were brought to Durrington Walls from all across Britain, some from as far away as Scotland, indicating that people were converging on this place from great distances, bringing their livestock with them as contributions to a colossal communal effort. This brings us to the purpose of these immense gatherings. The animal bones themselves tell a clear tale. These were the remains of huge ceremonial feasts. The cut marks on the bones show skilled butchery, and the age of the animals suggests they were slaughtered en masse, typically at about 9 months old. This timing is crucial as it points directly to the winter. If animals were born in the spring, a 9-month-old slaughter would place the event right around the time of the midwinter solstice. This is not a coincidence. It seems Durrington Walls was the stage for enormous solstice celebrations, a place where thousands of people gathered to mark the turning of the year with feasting on an almost unimaginable scale. The air would have been thick with the smoke of countless roasting fires, the sounds of laughter, storytelling, and ceremony filling the timber circle. This was the land of the living, a place of noise, warmth, and vibrant temporary community, standing in stark contrast to the silent stone permanence of Stonehenge just 2 miles away. This stark contrast forms the heart of a compelling theory about the relationship between the 2 sites. Archaeologists now propose that Stonehenge and Durrington Walls were part of a single, profound ritual landscape representing 2 halves of a complete cosmological worldview. Durrington Walls, with its evidence of feasting, temporary housing, and vast quantities of everyday debris, was unequivocally the domain of the living. It was where the community gathered to celebrate, to eat, and to prepare for the most sacred rites. Stonehenge, conversely, with its deep history as a cemetery and its timeless stone architecture, was the domain of the ancestors. The 2 sites were physically linked by the avenue, that ceremonial pathway that connects Stonehenge to the River Avon, which in turn flows directly past Durrington Walls. This was not just a geographical connection, it was a spiritual highway, we can now reconstruct a possible sequence for the grand midwinter solstice ceremony. As the shortest day of the year approached, people would have journeyed from across the country to the great encampment at Durrington Walls. There, for several days, they would have engaged in massive feasts, forging social bonds and participating in preliminary rituals. Then, on the eve of the solstice, a grand procession would have formed. This was not a casual walk, but a highly structured ritual journey. The participants would have left the noisy, lively world of Durrington Walls and moved down to the River Avon. The river itself acted as a symbolic boundary, a liminal space between the world of the living and the world of the dead. After perhaps performing a purification right at the water's edge, the procession would have moved up the avenue, the same path used to bring the Bluestones to the circle centuries before. As they walked the final approach, the great stone circle would have remained hidden by the gentle curve of the land, building a powerful sense of anticipation. Then, at the moment of the winter solstice sunset, they would have crested the rise and witnessed the dying sun's rays framing the central Trilithons, flooding the realm of the ancestors with a final golden light. In this powerful ritual, the community did not just observe a celestial event. They physically enacted the cycle of life and death, moving from the vibrant, temporary world of the living to the eternal, stone world of the ancestors, reaffirming their connection to both in the pivotal moment of the sun's annual rebirth. This integrated landscape reveals a society with a sophisticated and poetic understanding of their place in the cosmos, using the very geography of their world to act out their most fundamental beliefs. But who were the people capable of such extraordinary vision and effort? To move beyond the stones and understand the mystery, we must meet the architects themselves, the Neolithic and early Bronze Age communities of Britain. It's tempting to picture them as primitive, struggling for mere survival, but the evidence reveals a far different story. These were not simple hunter-gatherers, they were settled farmers and herders who had mastered their environment. They cultivated wheat and barley and raised cattle, pigs, and sheep, transforming the wild landscape of Britain into managed fields and pastures. This agricultural surplus was the fundamental engine that made Stonehenge possible. It meant that not everyone had to spend every waking hour finding food. This society could support specialist craftspeople, skilled toolmakers, expert carpenters, and crucially, a class of project managers and astronomers who could plan, coordinate, and direct a project spanning centuries. Their social structure was undoubtedly complex, organized around kinship and communal labor, but likely with emerging hierarchies of chieftains or priest-kings who could command the loyalty and labor of thousands. The technological prowess of these communities was remarkable, especially when you consider they achieved everything without metal tools, without the wheel, and without written records. Their primary toolkit was made of flint and antler, materials we might consider simple, but which they used with the precision of master surgeons. To shape the colossal Sarsens, they employed stone mauls, large, heavy hammers made from other, harder stones. With endless, patient striking, they could fracture and dress these giants. For the intricate joinery, the mortise and tenon holes that locked the lintels to the uprights, they used picks made from red deer antler. These tools, when used with sand and water as an abrasive, could grind and polish even the hardest sandstone into smooth, precise shapes. They were also brilliant woodworkers, capable of felling giant oaks and shaping them into the sledges, rollers, and massive frames needed to transport and erect the stones. This was not brute force, it was applied physics. They understood leverage, friction, and the properties of materials on a grand scale, turning raw natural resources into the most sophisticated engineering project Britain would see for thousands of years. Perhaps the most telling sign of their advanced organization is the evidence of long-distance trade and communication. The Bluestones from Wales are the most famous example, but they were not alone. Polished stone axes from the Langdale region in the Lake District, over 200 miles to the north, have been found at sites around Stonehenge. Highly prized ceremonial items made of gold and amber, which must have originated from even farther afield, perhaps Ireland or continental Europe, also appear in later burials. This was not an isolated, insular society. They were part of a vast interaction sphere, a network of exchange and shared knowledge that stretched across Britain and beyond. These connections allowed for the flow of not just goods but also ideas. The concept of building massive stone circles, while most spectacularly realized at Stonehenge, was part of a wider cultural phenomenon seen across the British Isles and Brittany. The people who built Stonehenge were plugged into a Neolithic information highway, learning from neighbors, sharing innovations, and competing in a friendly rivalry to create the most impressive monuments to their gods, their ancestors, and their own collective identity. So let us finally picture them not as anonymous figures but as real people. Picture the farmer pausing from tending his herd to take his place on the ropes, heaving in unison with hundreds of others to drag a Sarsen stone across the chalk downland. Picture the craftswoman patiently pecking a mortise hole into a lintel for days on end, her knowledge passed down from her mother. Picture the elder, his memory holding the oral history of the project, his eyes tracing the moon's path against the stones to mark the time for the next gathering. These were the builders of Stonehenge. They were farmers, herders, parents, and children. They were brilliant engineers who transformed their landscape, and they were deep thinkers who sought to capture the cosmos in a ring of stone. They were bound together by a shared belief system so powerful it motivated them to undertake a work that would outlast them for millennia. By seeing their humanity, their intelligence, and their community, the silent stones begin to speak not of a cold, impenetrable mystery, but of a timeless human ambition to reach for the heavens and leave a permanent mark on the world. The sheer scale of the Sarsen stones presents a challenge that is almost difficult for the modern mind to grasp. We are talking about moving pillars that stood over 20 feet tall and weighed more than 25 tons, equivalent to a herd of fully grown male elephants. Yet, the Neolithic builders possessed a profound, practical understanding of physics, and their most likely method for moving these giants was a masterclass in applied teamwork and simple machines. The process almost certainly began with the creation of a sturdy wooden sledge from massive oak logs. Using levers made from entire tree trunks and ropes crafted from plated plant fibers, teams would have painstakingly maneuvered a stone onto this sledge. Then the real work began. Ahead of this heavy load, other workers would have laid down a track of wooden rollers, felled trees stripped of their branches. As teams of hundreds pulled on immense ropes, the sledge would slide forward over these rollers. The rollers themselves, now freed from the back of the sledge, would be continuously carried to the front, creating a slow but steady conveyor belt of motion across the landscape. The sound must have been tremendous, a symphony of groaning wood, creaking ropes, and the unified, rhythmic chanting of the pullers, a human engine driving stone across miles of chalk downland. Raising these colossal stones to a vertical position was an even more delicate and dangerous operation, requiring a different kind of brilliance. The builders likely started by digging a large, carefully shaped pit for the stone's base. This wasn't just a hole, it was engineered with one side sloped more gently than the other. The stone was then carefully maneuvered so that its base rested at the edge of the steep side of the pit, with its length projecting out over the sloped side. This setup was crucial. To hold the stone upright, teams would have used a combination of leverage and counterweight. Long, heavy poles could be used as levers to initially lift the stone's tip. Simultaneously, teams pulling from the top of the stone with ropes would provide the main lifting force. The sloped side of the pit acted as a guide, allowing the stone's base to pivot downward as the top was raised. This was a moment of incredible tension, with the massive monolith teetering on the edge of the pit before finally thudding into an upright position in its prepared socket. The final act was to quickly stabilize the stone by packing the pit tightly with crushed chalk, rubble, and smaller stones, locking it permanently into the earth. The final touch of architectural genius at Stonehenge lies in the sophisticated joinery that locked the entire structure together. The most famous feature is the lintel stones that once crowned the outer Sarsen circle, creating a continuous ring high above the ground. To achieve this, the builders employed a technique more commonly associated with fine woodworking. They meticulously carved the tops of the upright stones into smooth, rounded protrusions known as tenon. Then, on the underside of each horizontal lintel stone, they laboriously pecked and ground out corresponding hollows called mortise holes. This tongue and groove system meant that when a lintel was lowered onto two uprights, it literally locked into place. But the innovation didn't stop there. The lintels themselves were also connected to one another. The ends of each lintel were shaped with a special joint, a toggle on one end fitting perfectly into a loop carved into the next stone. This interlocking network transformed what could have been a simple circle of standing stones into a single, unified, and incredibly stable structure, capable of withstanding the relentless winds of the Salisbury Plain for millennia. This wasn't just stacking rocks, this was precision engineering on a colossal scale, demonstrating a level of planning and craftsmanship that rivals any ancient civilization in the world. For all its grandeur and enduring presence, Stonehenge was not destined to remain a vibrant center of ceremony and power forever. The great stone circle, which had taken over 1,000 years to build and perfect, was eventually abandoned, its original purpose fading into obscurity as the world around it fundamentally changed. The primary reason for this decline lies in a profound cultural transformation that swept across Britain during the Bronze Age. The societies that had once been unified by the shared, colossal project of building the monument began to fragment and reorganize. Power, which had previously been concentrated in the hands of chieftains or priestly elites who derived their authority from communal rituals and cosmic knowledge, began to shift toward a more warrior-based aristocracy. This new elite expressed their status not through the construction of massive public monuments, but through the possession of personal wealth, fine metalwork, elaborate weapons, and rich grave goods buried in individual round barrows that dotted the landscape. The focus of society was turning inward toward the individual and the family lineage, and away from the vast collective enterprises that had defined the Neolithic world. Alongside this social shift came a revolution in religious beliefs. The old gods, intimately tied to the cycles of the sun and moon and the ancestral spirits buried within the henge, were gradually supplanted by new deities and new ways of connecting with the divine. The precise cosmological observations that had been so crucial to the function of Stonehenge may have become less central to religious practice. People began to worship in different ways, in different places, perhaps in smaller, more personal groves or shrines. The very concept of a permanent, unchangeable cosmic center fixed on the Salisbury Plain may have simply lost its meaning for the new generations. Stonehenge, a monument built for a society obsessed with cycles and permanence, found itself in an era that valued linear progress and personal achievement. It became a relic of a bygone age, a magnificent but obsolete symbol of a worldview that was no longer widely shared. The process of abandonment was likely slow and gradual, not a single moment of desertion. The great solstice gatherings grew smaller over the decades, the processions along the avenue became less frequent, and the knowledge of how to read the intricate lunar alignments was eventually lost until one year no one came at all. Left to the elements, the great stones entered a long period of slow, inevitable decay. The first and most relentless force of destruction was simply nature itself. The fierce winds and driving rain of the English climate began to wear away at the stone surfaces, eroding the intricate carvings and smoothing the sharp edges crafted by the builders. Lichen and moss took root in the tiny cracks and fissures, their slow, biological processes further breaking down the stone. Freeze-thaw cycles in the winter would have exploited any weakness, gradually causing flakes and chunks to split away. But the decay was not solely natural. As the sacred significance of the site faded, it became a source of building material for later peoples. The Romans, who occupied Britain for centuries, seem to have held a superstitious respect for the monument, leaving coins and pottery as offerings, but they also may have quarried some of the smaller bluestones. The real damage came in the medieval and early modern periods. Local farmers and builders saw the fallen and leaning stones not as a sacred temple, but as a convenient quarry. Many of the smaller bluestones were likely broken up and carted away to be used as foundation stones for houses, or simply crushed for road metal. Evidence suggests that two of the large Sarsens were dragged away in the 17th century, a staggering feat in itself, to be used for a bridge construction nearby. This deliberate dismantling, piece by piece, forever altered the original composition and layout of the circle. Despite this physical decay, the mystery and power of the stones never completely faded from human memory. They simply took on a new life in the realm of legend and speculation. The Romans, whose own historians wrote about the Druids, mistakenly associated the monument with these Celtic priests, a misconception that would persist for over 1,000 years. Later, during the Saxon and medieval periods, wild and wonderful stories emerged to explain the impossible structure. The most famous of these legends was recorded by the 12th century chronicler Geoffrey of Monmouth, who wove a fantastic tale of the wizard Merlin magically transporting the massive stones from Ireland. According to this story, the stones, originally from Africa, had been brought to Ireland by giants who used them for their healing properties. The British King Aurelius Ambrosius wanted them for a memorial to nobles slain by the Saxons, and Merlin used his arcane arts to disassemble the circle and float the stones across the sea to their current location. This story, though pure fiction, demonstrates that even 800 years ago, people recognized that the stones were special and that their transportation was a superhuman feat that required a magical explanation. Other medieval writers proposed that the stones were the work of giants, or that they were erected by the devil himself as a trick. For the common people living in the shadow of the ruins, Stonehenge became a place of superstition and folk magic. The fallen stones and the barrows around it were often thought to be the homes of fairies or other supernatural beings. The enduring belief in the healing power of the bluestones persisted, with people chipping off small fragments to be used as talismans or ground into powder for potions. This long period of legend and gradual ruin represents a fascinating middle chapter in the life of Stonehenge. It was no longer the active, beating heart of a civilization, but it had not yet become the subject of scientific inquiry. It existed in a kind of liminal state, a physical enigma that challenged the understanding of every generation that encountered it, forcing them to create their own stories to fill the void of forgotten history, ensuring that even in its decay, the stones would never be truly forgotten. As the centuries turned and the great civilizations of the stone builders faded into the distant past, Stonehenge did not simply vanish from human consciousness. Instead, it embarked on a new chapter in its long life, one not of construction and ceremony, but of speculation and legend. In the medieval mind, which saw the world through a lens of scripture, saints, and supernatural forces, the colossal stones presented an impossible problem. How could mere humans, without divine or diabolical assistance, have possibly raised such giants? The answer, for many, lay not in the annals of forgotten history, but in the realm of myth and magic. The most famous and enduring of these legends was penned by a 12th century Welsh cleric named Geoffrey of Monmouth in his fanciful history of the kings of Britain. In a captivating narrative, he wove the stones directly into the saga of King Arthur, attributing their creation to the great wizard Merlin. According to Geoffrey's tale, the British King Aurelius Ambrosius wanted to erect a grand memorial to a group of nobles who had been treacherously slain by Saxon invaders. Merlin, his chief advisor, suggested a remarkable solution. He told the king of a mystical circle of stones in Ireland, known as the Giant's Ring, which had been originally brought from Africa by a race of giants. These stones, he claimed, possessed magical healing properties. the king dispatched an army led by his brother Other Pendragon to fetch them. When the soldiers found they could not dismantle the stones, Merlin simply used his arcane arts to disassemble the circle and magically transport the stones across the sea to Salisbury Plain, where they were re-erected as a monument. This story, while pure invention, provided a satisfying explanation for a baffling structure, firmly planting the idea of the monument's magical origins in the popular imagination for centuries to come. Geoffrey's tale was just one of many supernatural explanations that flourished during the Middle Ages. Other chroniclers, equally perplexed, proposed that the stones were the work of the devil himself, erected in a single night to mock the works of God. For the local Saxon population, who named the structure Stonehenges, meaning hanging stones, the site was a place of superstition and eerie power. It was commonly believed that the stones could not be counted accurately, that they would move of their own accord, or that they were inhabited by fairies and other capricious spirits. This folkloric layer added a new, cautionary dimension to the site, transforming it from a place of sacred ritual into a landscape of mystery and potential danger. The very fact that its original purpose was utterly lost made it a blank canvas onto which each generation could project its own fears, wonders, and understanding of the world. The stones were no longer a temple to the sun, but a puzzle that challenged the medieval worldview, demanding an explanation that fit within their framework of divine and demonic intervention. This period ensured that Stonehenge, even in its physical decay, would remain a potent and talked about feature in the cultural landscape of Britain. With the dawn of the Renaissance and its rekindled interest in classical learning and empirical inquiry, the way people looked at Stonehenge began to shift once more. The old magical explanations began to seem increasingly fanciful to a new class of scholars and antiquarians. These early investigators started to look at the monument with a more critical, albeit still often mistaken, eye. They sought to attribute its construction to a known historical civilization, one whose engineering prowess they could respect. The most obvious candidate was the Roman Empire, whose roads, walls, and villas were still visible across Britain. In 1586, the English antiquarian William Camden proposed that Stonehenge was a Roman temple, likely dedicated to the sky god Caelus. This theory had a certain logical appeal. The Romans were known to have been in Britain for centuries and were capable of grand architectural projects. The precision of the stone circle, it was argued, reflected Roman engineering discipline, a marked improvement over the supposed barbarism of the ancient Britons. Another popular theory pointed the finger at the Danes. Given the Viking incursions and subsequent settlement in parts of Britain, some scholars speculated that Stonehenge was a monument built by these Scandinavian invaders, perhaps as a coronation site for their kings or a site for pagan rituals. This theory was often tied to the mistaken belief that the Druids, whom classical writers had described as the priests of the Celts, were involved with the site. Since the Druids were associated with the pre-Roman Britons, who were thought to be culturally linked to the Danes, a confused but persistent connection was forged between Stonehenge, the Druids, and the Vikings. This era also saw the first serious attempts to document and measure the stones, moving beyond pure speculation. The most famous of these early efforts was led by the famed architect Sir Christopher Wren, who surveyed the site in the late 17th century. While Wren himself was skeptical of the Roman theory, his work represented a new scientific approach. He and others began to carefully draw the stones, measure their positions, and record their state of decay. This meticulous attention to detail slowly began to reveal the true complexity of the monument, chipping away at the wilder legends. Yet, even these learned men were working with a very limited historical framework. They lacked the archaeological methods and dating techniques we have today, and their interpretations were inevitably colored by the knowledge available to them. They were trying to solve a prehistoric mystery with the tools of the early modern world, and while they moved the conversation forward from Merlin and magic, they were still centuries away from uncovering the truth. The mystery persisted, but its nature was evolving, transforming from a question of supernatural agency into a historical detective story, setting the stage for the scientific investigations that would follow in the centuries to come. The slow decay and romantic speculation of the medieval and early modern periods could not last forever. A new, more systematic way of looking at the world was on the rise, and with it came the birth of archaeology. The first person to truly bring a scientific, albeit still flawed, eye to Stonehenge was an 18th century antiquarian named William Stukeley. He was a man of his time, a trained physician with a passion for measurement and observation, but also steeped in the mystical ideas of the era. Stukeley spent years meticulously surveying the monument and its surrounding landscape, producing beautifully detailed drawings that are still valuable to researchers today. He was the first to accurately identify and name the avenue, that ceremonial processional way leading to the river Avon, and he correctly recognized that Stonehenge was part of a much wider Neolithic ceremonial landscape, dotted with burial mounds and other earthworks. His work was a monumental leap forward in documentation, pulling the monument out of the realm of pure legend and into the light of empirical study. Yet Stukeley's interpretations were heavily influenced by his own beliefs. He became a devout follower of a movement called Druidism, which romanticized the ancient Celtic priests, convinced that the Druids were a group of patriarchal monotheists who had built Stonehenge. He famously declared it the work of the British Druids. This was a significant, though incorrect, conclusion. We now know the monument is thousands of years older than the Celtic Druids of the Iron Age, but Stukeley's powerful association between the stones and the Druids became cemented in the public imagination, a connection so enduring that it still shapes modern neo-pagan celebrations at the site today. His legacy is therefore a double-edged sword. He provided the first rigorous survey that laid the groundwork for all future science, but he also saddled Stonehenge with a mistaken identity that would take centuries to correct. He showed the world that the stones could be measured and mapped, even if their true builders remained a mystery. The baton of investigation then passed to a series of individuals and, unfortunately, some less scrupulous treasure hunters. For much of the 19th century, digging at Stonehenge was haphazard and often destructive. The most notorious of these early excavators was a man named William Cunnington, who worked for a wealthy patron. Their methods were crude by modern standards, essentially digging trenches in search of interesting artifacts with little regard for the stratigraphic layers they were destroying. While Cunnington did recover some important finds, like cremated remains and ancient pottery, the context of these discoveries, their precise location and relationship to other features, was often poorly recorded, meaning a vast amount of priceless information was lost forever. This period highlights a painful truth in the history of archaeology. The initial desire to simply find things often came at the cost of understanding them. Everything changed in the early 20th century with the work of William Hawley, a retired army colonel appointed by the government to conduct the first major, long-term archaeological investigation of Stonehenge. Hawley's work, which took place from 1919 to 1926, was transformative. He was remarkably thorough and systematic for his time. Instead of just hunting for treasure, he embarked on a methodical campaign to excavate nearly half of the entire site. He meticulously uncovered and recorded the circle of 56 Aubrey Holes, solving the mystery of those enigmatic chalk-filled pits that had puzzled observers since John Aubrey's day. He also revealed the Y and Z holes, two later concentric rings of pits outside the Sarsen circle, whose purpose remains unclear. Perhaps most importantly, Hawley was one of the first to recognize and document the tool marks left by the original Neolithic builders on the surfaces of the stones, providing direct, tangible evidence of the people who had shaped them. His work established once and for all that Stonehenge was not a single, unified construction, but a complex site that had been built and modified in distinct phases over more than a millennium. However, Hawley's extensive digging also had a consequence he never intended. By exposing so many of the stone sockets and ancient features that had been protected for millennia by a blanket of earth, he inadvertently made the entire structure less stable. Many of the stones, already leaning precariously after centuries of neglect, were now in genuine danger of collapse. This precarious state set the stage for one of the most controversial chapters in Stonehenge's long history, the Great Restoration projects of the 20th century. Beginning in 1901 and continuing in several phases through the 1950s and 60s, a government-led effort was launched to straighten and secure the monument. This was not a reconstruction but a consolidation, a necessary intervention to prevent the stones from falling forever. Using modern cranes and concrete, engineers carefully straightened leaning megaliths, set them in concrete bases, and re-erected several key stones that had fallen in previous centuries, most notably the massive outer Sarsen number 56 and the great lintel that crowns the tallest Trilithon. The impact of this work was profound and forever altered the monument's appearance. The Stonehenge we see today, with its proud, upright stones and neatly reset lintels, is in many ways a product of this 20th century stabilization. Before these efforts, the site was a much more jumbled and ruinous collection of fallen and tilting stones. While absolutely essential for its preservation, these restorations have sparked ongoing debate among archaeologists and purists. Some argue that in making the monument stable, we have also made it feel more complete and less ancient, sanitizing the romantic decay that had characterized it for so long. We have, in a sense, frozen it in a single moment in time, a moment chosen by 20th century engineers rather than by its original builders. Yet, without this decisive action, it is almost certain that many of the iconic stones would now be lying flat on the ground, shattered or carted away for building material. The restoration was a pragmatic choice to save the monument for future generations, even if it meant accepting that the authentic ruin had to be partially sacrificed to ensure its survival. It is a permanent part of the Stonehenge story, a reminder that our relationship with the past is not just about discovery, but also about stewardship, a responsibility that sometimes requires leaving our own mark on the very history we seek to preserve. Looking at the familiar profile of Stonehenge today, your eye might instinctively trace the graceful arcs of the surviving lintels, those massive horizontal stones that bridge the gaps between the uprights, creating those iconic doorways to the sky. But if you look more carefully, you'll notice that these connecting stones are incomplete. The Great Sarsen Circle, as originally designed, was a continuous ring of 30 upright stones crowned by 30 lintels, locked together with those sophisticated tongue and groove joints. Today, only 6 of these lintels remain in their original positions. This absence presents us with a very tangible physical mystery. Where did the other 24 go? They didn't simply vanish into thin air. These were 40-ton blocks of sandstone. Their disappearance is a detective story written in empty space and scattered clues, a puzzle that forces us to consider the monument's long history after its builders abandoned it, a period of over 3,000 years of neglect, reuse, and slow decay. One of the most persistent and logical theories is that these missing megaliths were simply taken. For centuries, the people living on the Salisbury Plain saw the Great Stone Circle not as a protected national treasure, but as a convenient and seemingly endless quarry. Imagine a medieval stonemason tasked with building a new church or a sturdy farmhouse in the nearby town. Transporting stone from a distant quarry was expensive and laborious. But here, just a few miles away, was a ready supply of perfectly good pre-cut stone blocks, already shaped and available for the taking. The lintels, in particular, would have been prime targets. While toppling a 25-ton upright would have been a dangerous and difficult task, a lintel that had already fallen to the ground was essentially a gift. It was a manageable shape, easier to break into smaller pieces using fire setting and hammers. We have historical records that support this. In the 17th century, the diarist John Evelyn noted that two of the large Sarsens were deliberately dragged away to be used in the construction of a local bridge. It's almost certain that many of the missing lintels suffered a similar fate, broken up and carted off to become anonymous foundation stones in village homes, boundary markers in fields, or cobbles for a roadway, their ancient sacred purpose utterly forgotten by the practical needs of later generations. Of course, not all the stones needed human intervention to fall. The relentless forces of nature working over millennia would have played a significant role. The Salisbury Plain is exposed to fierce winds, and the ground, while stable, is still subject to subtle shifts and settling. A lintel is a beam, and any beam is only as strong as its supports. If one of the two uprights holding a lintel began to lean inwards or outwards, perhaps due to the ground freezing and thawing beneath its base, it would place an immense, twisting strain on the stone connecting them. Over centuries, this constant, uneven pressure could have caused the lintel to crack and eventually plummet to the earth. Once a lintel had fallen, it became vulnerable. Lying flat on the ground, it was far more exposed to the elements. Rainwater would pool in its mortise holes, freezing in the winter and expanding, slowly but surely splitting the stone apart. The same process that shaped the downs over eons was also patiently dismantling the work of humanity, stone by stone. Then there is the possibility of deliberate, targeted destruction. As we've seen, the meaning of Stonehenge changed dramatically over time. For the Romans, it may have been a curious temple of a local god, but for the early Christians in Anglo-Saxon and medieval England, the Great Stone Circle would have represented a powerful and threatening pagan idol. In an era where faith was often enforced through the destruction of rival symbols, toppling the stones could have been seen as a righteous act, a way of demonstrating the superiority of the new god over the old ones. While there's no direct historical record of a Christian mob attacking Stonehenge, we know this happened at other pagan sites across Europe. The act of pushing over a lintel, sending it crashing to the ground, would have been a powerful symbolic victory, a desecration meant to strip the place of its perceived demonic power. The motivation wouldn't have been practical reuse, but spiritual cleansing, adding a layer of ideological conflict to the stone's long story. The truth of the missing lintels is likely a combination of all these factors: natural decay, practical plunder, and perhaps even purposeful vandalism, all occurring at different times over the many centuries when the monument was largely forgotten by history. This physical incompleteness is a powerful reminder of how much we have lost. When we look at Stonehenge now, we are not seeing the monument in its pristine, finished state. We are seeing a ruin, a palimpsest that has been edited by time, weather, and human hands. The empty spaces where those 24 lintels should be are silent testimonials to this long interval of neglect, a period when the cosmic computer and ancestral temple became just a pile of old rocks in a field, its secrets buried not in the earth but in the disinterest of the ages. It forces us to wonder what other features, perhaps made of wood or more delicate materials, have vanished without a trace, leaving our picture of this ancient wonder permanently and profoundly incomplete. And yet, for all the grand certainty of the Sarsen circle and the solstice alignments, Stonehenge holds onto quieter, more subtle enigmas that remind us just how much of its story remains hidden. Just outside the great ring of towering stones, lying in two concentric circles, are a series of pits known as the Y and Z holes. They are not dramatic, not easily visible to the casual visitor, but for archaeologists they represent one of the site's most profound and stubborn mysteries. Discovered during William Hawley's systematic excavations in the 1920s, these pits form two irregular rings that encircle the entire monument. The Y holes are the inner ring, numbering 30, and the Z holes are the outer ring, numbering 29, and they were dug during the monument's final chapter, well over 1,000 years after the first earthwork was raised. What makes them so deeply puzzling is not their existence but their fate. These pits were meticulously excavated from the chalk bedrock, and then, almost as soon as they were dug, they were deliberately and carefully filled back in. It was as if a grand plan was set in motion and then abruptly abandoned, leaving behind a ghostly blueprint of an intention we can no longer decipher. The very nature of these pits rules out many of the obvious explanations. They were clearly not stone holes intended to hold a new circle of monoliths. Their size and spacing are too irregular, and more importantly, there is no evidence, no stone chips, no crushed chalk packing, no fragments of Welsh bluestone or sarsen, that a single standing stone was ever placed in any of them. The ground within the pits remained pristine, untouched by the weight and friction of a massive pillar. This leads to the compelling and slightly haunting theory that the Y and Z holes were part of an ambitious new phase of construction that was never completed. Imagine the vision. The community, or perhaps a new generation of leaders, decided to expand the sacred geometry of Stonehenge, to add 2 new outer rings, perhaps of timber or a new set of stones, creating an even more complex and awe-inspiring structure. The workforce would have been assembled, the pits dug according to a grand plan known only to a few, marking out the new celestial pattern on the ground. And then, for reasons we can only guess at, the project collapsed, perhaps a period of social unrest, a shift in political power, or an environmental crisis like a failed harvest diverted all resources and attention. The pits, representing a future that never arrived, stood empty for a short while as a monument to a broken dream before being respectfully backfilled, a silent admission that the age of building at Stonehenge was finally over. Another possibility is that these pits served a purely ritualistic purpose, never intended to hold anything physical at all. In many ancient belief systems, the act of digging into the earth was itself a sacred endeavor, a way of connecting with the chthonic powers of the underworld, the realm of the ancestors and earth deities. The pits could have been dug as offerings to the land. Perhaps communities gathered to deposit symbolic offerings in them, not precious objects that would be looted, but perishable spiritual gifts. Think of baskets of specially selected grain, bundles of sacred herbs, or the blood of sacrificed animals poured into the earth to ensure fertility for the coming year. The act of digging and then immediately sealing the pits could have been the entire point, a way of giving a gift directly to the earth, a transaction with the divine that was meant to be unseen and permanent. The backfilling wasn't an abandonment, but the crucial final step of the ritual, closing the conduit to the underworld and locking the offering in place. This transforms the Y and Z holes from a failed construction site into a successful, if mysterious, ceremonial act, one whose spiritual logic is completely lost to us. What adds another layer of intrigue is the curious numerical count of the pits. The inner Y holes number 30, which curiously mirrors the 30 uprights of the Sarsen circle. The outer Z holes number 29, a figure that echoes the 29.5 days of the lunar cycle. This numerical parallel is surely not a coincidence. It suggests that even in its final stages, the people using Stonehenge were still thinking in cosmic terms, still mapping the cycles of the heavens onto the landscape. Perhaps the 30 Y holes were a symbolic representation of the solar month, while the 29 Z holes were a deliberate nod to the synodic month of the moon. This would mean the monument, at the very end of its active life, was being used to harmonize the solar and lunar calendars in a new, abstract way. The fact that the Z holes are also noticeably more irregular and poorly laid out than the Y holes might hint at a society in decline, where the precise knowledge of the original builders was starting to fade, but the symbolic impulse remained strong. They were still trying to replicate the cosmic order, even if their execution was becoming less perfect. Ultimately, the Y and Z holes stand as a powerful testament to the limits of our understanding. While we can make educated guesses about solstice alignments and the function of the altar stone, these pits offer no such clarity. They are a blank space in the narrative. They force us to confront the fact that we are interpreting the actions of people whose worldview, priorities, and spiritual language were fundamentally different from our own. The mystery of the Y and Z holes is not a loud, dramatic one. It is a quiet, persistent whisper from the past. It reminds us that Stonehenge is not a puzzle with a single solution, but a complex, multi-layered story. And for some of its most intriguing chapters, we have lost the key. They are the enduring proof that this ancient circle still has secrets it is not yet ready to give up. Managing a monument that has survived for 5,000 years presents a unique set of modern challenges, chief among them being the sheer weight of human admiration. Today, Stonehenge is an UNESCO World Heritage Site that draws over 1 million visitors from across the globe each year. While this global fascination is a testament to its enduring power, the constant flow of people brings with it a very real threat to the stone's preservation. The simple act of walking near the stones compacts the earth, damaging the fragile archaeological layers buried just beneath the surface. In the past, when visitors were allowed to walk freely among the stones, the cumulative effect of touch, the pressure of countless feet, and even the oil from human hands subtly accelerated the natural erosion of the sandstone. The challenge for English Heritage, the charity that manages the site, is a delicate balancing act: how to allow public access to this wonder while ensuring it survives for another 5,000 years. To combat the physical toll of tourism, a comprehensive and scientifically informed conservation program is constantly in effect. Teams of conservators and archaeologists monitor the stones with the care of doctors tending to a revered elder. They use laser scanning technology to create incredibly detailed three-dimensional maps of the entire monument, allowing them to track the tiniest cracks, flakes, or erosional changes over time with millimeter precision. This vigilant monitoring helps them understand the rate of decay and plan necessary interventions. One of the most significant conservation measures was the decision, implemented in the late 1970s, to rope off the stone circle itself. While visitors can no longer walk among the stones, this single action has dramatically slowed the pace of wear and tear, protecting the ancient surfaces from the inadvertent damage of touch and the pressure of so many feet. The grass surrounding the stones is also carefully managed, and the water runoff is controlled to prevent further ground erosion, ensuring the very earth that holds the stones upright remains stable. The modern visitor experience has been thoughtfully redesigned around this imperative to preserve. When you arrive at Stonehenge today, you do not drive directly up to the stones. Instead, you park at a discreet, state-of-the-art visitor center located about 1.5 miles away from the monument. This center is far more than a ticket booth. It is a gateway to understanding. Here, you can explore world-class exhibitions featuring over 250 ancient objects found in the landscape, from pottery and tools to the remains of the people who built and used the site. You can step inside life-sized reconstructions of Neolithic houses, getting a tangible sense of the daily lives of the community that undertook this epic project. From the visitor center, a quiet, low-impact shuttle bus ferries visitors to the monument, or you can choose to walk part of the ancient processional avenue, gradually approaching the stones across the vast, open landscape, much as our ancestors might have done, allowing for a sense of anticipation and respect to build with every step. This carefully managed access creates a powerful contrast with the famous solstice gatherings, the one time each year when the ropes come down and the rules are relaxed. For the summer and winter solstices, English Heritage opens the stone circle for free public access, allowing thousands of people to gather inside the inner circle to witness the sunrise. This is a deeply symbolic compromise, a recognition of the monument's ongoing spiritual and cultural significance. It is a vibrant, chaotic, and often muddy celebration where modern druids, pagans, tourists, and curious locals stand shoulder to shoulder in the pre-dawn gloom. As the sun crests the horizon, a collective cheer erupts, drums beat, and for a few sacred hours, the stones are alive with human energy once more. This managed permissiveness honors the living tradition of the solstice while containing the potential for damage to a limited, supervised period, a brilliant solution that respects both past and present. Ultimately, the story of Stonehenge today is one of stewardship on a grand scale. The efforts to preserve it are not just about protecting a collection of old rocks. They are about safeguarding a profound piece of human heritage, a monument that represents one of our species' earliest and most ambitious attempts to understand our place in the universe. Every decision, from the location of the visitor center to the precise angle of a laser scanner, is made with the long view in mind. The goal is to mitigate the impacts of our modern world, from tourism to climate change, so that future generations can continue to stand in awe before these stones, to feel their mystery, and to ask their own questions of the silent, enduring sentinels of Salisbury Plain. The greatest tribute we can pay to the builders of Stonehenge is to ensure their legacy endures, not as a static museum piece, but as a living, breathing source of wonder for millennia yet to come. And so our quiet journey across the Salisbury Plain, through the mists of time, begins to draw to a close. We have walked together through the long, unfolding story of this sacred circle, from the first earthwork dug by hands millennia gone, to the final, mysterious pits that were filled as quickly as they were made. We have traced the epic voyages of the Bluestones, those revered pillars of a distant Welsh mountain, and stood in awe before the engineering genius that raised the Sarsen giants into their timeless embrace. We have met the architects, not mythic giants or wizards, but real people, farmers and herders, whose collective vision and sheer willpower forged a legacy in stone. We have listened to the whispers of the past, from the solstice alignment that floods the circle with golden light to the haunting reverberations that once transformed human chant into a divine chorus. The great secret of Stonehenge, it seems, is that there is no single, simple answer to the question of why. Its true purpose lies not in one grand function, but in the beautiful, complex tapestry woven from all the theories we have explored. It was all at once a celestial calendar that mapped the sun and moon with breathtaking precision, allowing a society to mark the seasons and perhaps even predict the awe-inspiring drama of an eclipse. It was a temple, a cathedral of its age, where the community gathered to connect with God's ancestors and the powerful forces of nature, their rituals sanctified by the very architecture around them. It was a hospital, a sanctuary of hope where the sick and injured traveled vast distances to seek healing from the magical Bluestones, their faith as much a medicine as any physical treatment. And it was, from its very beginning, a cemetery, a final resting place for the ancestors, intertwining the cycle of human life and death with the eternal cycles of the cosmos above. To try and separate these roles is to misunderstand the Neolithic mind. For the people who built and used Stonehenge, the universe was a unified, interconnected whole. The movement of the sun was not separate from the power to heal. The veneration of the dead was not separate from the authority of the living. The monument was the ultimate expression of this holistic worldview, a machine, a temple, a hospital, and a tomb, all working in concert to serve the spiritual, practical, and social needs of an entire civilization. It was the beating heart of their world, a place where every facet of human existence could be addressed, understood, and celebrated. As the sun sets on our exploration, we are left not with a final answer, but with something perhaps more valuable, a profound and enduring sense of wonder. The true magic of Stonehenge is not that it gives up its secrets easily, but that it holds them close, inviting each new generation to look, to question, and to feel a connection across the vast expanse of time. It stands as a silent, powerful reminder of the incredible capabilities of our ancestors, their deep yearning to understand their place in the cosmos, and their desire to create something that would truly last. We hope this deep, relaxing journey has offered you not just knowledge, but a moment of peace and introspection. The mystery of Stonehenge belongs to all of us, and now we would love to hear from you. What theory about this ancient circle resonates most deeply with you? Do you see it primarily as an astronomical observatory, a sacred temple, or a place of healing pilgrimage? Or does your own imagination offer a different possibility entirely? Share your thoughts, your questions, and your own sense of wonder in the comments below. Let's continue this conversation together, keeping the story of these ancient stones alive for everyone who seeks their mystery. Thank you for joining us on this journey.